it's remained one of the most memorable debuts in writing history. That's Stephen King's Carrie. How memorable, you might ask? Well, they've only made like 1 billion movies about it. Now, some people will throw the word around remake, which bothers me because this is based, of course, on a novel, so it's really a readaptation. Or is it? That's the question we're asking, because we're reviewing 2013's Carrie. Hit that music!
Movies, music, story times, all kinds of shit for you. Everything goes if it's passing out from
Now, Brian De Palma's classic 1970s adaptation of Carrie is not only one of the most well-regarded horror films ever, it's just kind of a well-regarded film in general. It's remained at the forefront of the genre, you know, as kind of like a point of pride, if you will. And it's also remained as one of the best adaptations of Stephen King's novel. And I mean, that's almost like a given, considering the novel is razor thin, so you'd expect them to be able to get the bulk of it in there. That being said, in the adaptation process, a lot of stuff was, skimmed over and or cut out of the mix, so to speak. So, while a lot of people threw away the notion, even Stephen King himself, of another version of this, many going, like Stephen King himself, why, if the first one's already good? Well, the answer was in screenwriter Roberto Aguirre Sacasa's adaptation, where he kind of used the framework of the original screenplay, as in literally the original screenplay's writer is credited as a screenwriter in this, but he used that framework to go back into the novel and extract more from the source material, reintegrate it into the story, and see where that took us. So what we ultimately get is a movie that's both a remake of a movie and a readaptation of the book, which is interesting. You know, you don't often get that. But we did watch this about a week ago. What are your thoughts off the cuff? We haven't discussed this. What are your thoughts about the film in general?
I thought it was very okay. I didn't think it was great, but I also didn't hate it. I was kind of in the middle, leaning more towards the liking, but definitely not being blown away by it.
Now, there's when it comes to remakes or readaptations in this instance, a lot of people often wonder what can be brought in that could make a readaptation or a remake worthy of the effort. And oftentimes it goes by the wayside. But in instances like, say, The Thing, we get something completely new and different, unique. Sometimes it surpasses...
Or even really It took the same framework but changed a lot.
Right. It surpasses the material sometimes. And this one kind of doesn't surpass the material, but it does add elements that, to someone that hasn't read the book, weren't previously there. So it's not a completely useless readaptation in the sense that it's not just a word-for-word translation of what's going on in the original. So it's not a case of, say, the 1990s version of Psycho, where you just get a very technically savvy, but ultimately mirror copy of the original. So thankfully that is not the case. But the new elements added to this, are they worth the time? Are they not? Well, I can tell you as a reader of the novel, I was very glad to see those elements reintegrated back into the piece, because they do add a different texture to Carrie's character. And I will tell you this, as far as the story beats go, this version of Carrie is a lot more of a direct translation of what is in the novel. You can almost follow the novel beat to beat according to what is on the screen in Carrie. The only difference, of course, being that it's updated to modern time versus the 70s. So there are those aesthetic differences to take into mind. But did you take into account that you've seen the original Carrie, like a half a year ago or so? Did you notice any of these additional elements or not? Oh, which ones are the ones you noticed, if you did, etc.?
I didn't notice very much different, if I'm going to be honest with you. they did expand on the ending and her little rampage, and I guess there was more of like the mom dynamic stuff. But honestly, I didn't really notice much difference.
The big differences come in the development of Carrie herself, and that is in the sense that Carrie here, this go around, is yes portrayed with that same sheepish nature that she had in the original adaptation, which goes in kind with the book, but what they reintegrated into the story is the idea that Carrie is fully aware, or I shouldn't say fully aware, but she is becoming increasingly aware, I should say, of her abilities beforehand. So she is tinkering with the idea of doing something with that, versus her latent abilities become present all the more, especially during the Black Prom, the prom night scene, which is how it's mostly portrayed in the Brian De Palma movie. Now, I think this is the most pressing reintegration of material into the story, and in a time like this, I think it's also the most relevant, because it shows that Carrie, though portrayed as our protagonist and kind of an innocent, she is also that perennial bullied student, in the sense that she is thinking about doing something. And this is the age of school shootings and stuff, so this casts an entirely different light on Carrie. This is a Carrie who is toying with a concept of vengeance.
I never really got that. I think it didn't really come across as like she's gonna get vengeance. It was just like she's learning about her powers. I'm sure that was the thing, but it never really came off as that.
I think it did, especially in terms of when she's doing things and her reactions to her achieving certain things. It's a matter of, and it's done exactly as it is in the book, in terms of when she begins to practice her abilities. In the book, it's referred to as flexing her mind. And if you notice in the film exactly when she's doing these things, it's always after a certain event. And her reaction to that is a mixture of wonderment and kind of like there's almost like a look of devilish glee almost, which again mirrors what's in the book in terms of giving you an insight into her mind. However, what remains intact as well is the idea that Carrie is just a girl stuck between cruel extremes, at home and at school. There is no respite for her. So Carrie is always someone that is seeking, primarily and above all, just a moment where something goes right. And I think that stands true for both adaptations, which is good, because that keeps Carrie a character that you can endear yourself to, despite what she may or may not be capable of. She becomes less of a monster and a freak to the viewer, and more somebody that's empathetic, because of that particular part of her nature. On top of that, what they chose to focus more on in this version regarding her mother was that despite her mother's cruel and extremist religious ways, there was a definite love for her daughter. It's just that she was ill-equipped to make those two sides of herself come together as one. So she came off as cruel, much more than being outwardly manically cruel as she was in the original Brian De Palma film. And that's kind of odd, because really the mother in the book is a combination of both. So I think, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but perhaps the screenwriter decided to go to the opposite end of the spectrum with the mother, keeping her in the same vein, but making her much more of a manipulative figure rather than a overbearing figure, though the overbearing nature remains. Did you notice this difference in the mother, from one to the other adaptation?
Yeah, and I will say that is one of the things I liked in this one, was that they kind of altered, well, not really altered, but well, let's just say altered. They kind of altered the relationship with Carrie and her mom.
Yeah.
And I thought that the stuff with them worked really well and was really good.
Yeah.
So I will praise all that stuff as something that I actually really did like in this movie.
And I thought it was a excellent thing to add in, because it really, really added something to the impact of the final scene.
Yeah.
And that was kind of missing in the original. Again, I'm not saying this is better than the original, but it was missing in the original. And it's something that is present in the book. And that is that despite it all, despite everything she's gone through, despite all the cruelty she saw, Carrie loves her mother. And although the ending in this, the Black Prom Forward, maintains a closer affiliation to the Brian De Palma movie, they did keep that specific element in terms of Carrie doing what she did at the end, as she brings everything down on herself, kind of as a redemptive move after realizing what she'd done to her mother. And that's kind of what happens in the book. Although in the book, it's done not in the White household, but it's done where the people, the antagonists, what is the name of the Cavalier, the bar where the antagonists go to hump basically after they spilt the blood all over Kerry, and their death is completely an accident. Kerry doesn't go and hunt them down. Kerry goes to destroy the place where she was conceived as a redemptive motion towards her mother. And I think that was something that was completely and utterly lacking in the original. But here they kind of did it by keeping the beats of the original as far as the Black Prom Forward, and then sewing them back together with what was intended here, which was pretty neat, I gotta say. But yeah, I really enjoyed that as well. And Julianne Moore, well, of course, credit to her. I mean, she's just obviously a fantastic actress. I really liked that they put in an intro that allowed us to see something that is mentioned in the book in a flashback of sorts, where we get to see Carrie's birth and how stubborn her mother is, and how on top of that she fights with her religious nature. And that really, really, like I said, tied in well together with that last scene, only with the other end of the spectrum being Carrie's now in kind of the mother's role. So yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. What did you think of the other characters and how they were portrayed in this version versus the original? Most specifically, of course, the two couples, Tommy Ross and Sue Snell.
Yeah, I think. Well, let me just talk about Carrie. I think Carrie was really well played. I think the mom was really well played. I think Sue was okay at best. She was all right. And I don't know her boyfriend. I don't remember his name.
Tommy.
He was okay. He was actually. I think he was way better than Sue in this movie. I think Sue was bafflingly kind of downplayed, like way too much in this movie, like to a point that she just disappears at one point and then comes back at the end. And I didn't like that.
Well, let's stop you right there. Those are the two things. And so let me give you the insight of the book. Those are actually how the characters are portrayed in the book, in the sense that Tommy is the first person to incite a sense of guilt in Sue, which he does in the movie, which I really liked. I really actually liked how Tommy was portrayed in this. And they got a guy that was really affable and likable.
I think he was the guy from Baby Driver, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very likable actor. So it came off as genuine.
Yeah.
This is a guy that, despite being a jock, is a genuinely good person. And he is the one that drives the idea of some sort of repentance and regret in Sue. And Sue, in the movie, likewise, is portrayed in the book. She comes across that idea first through Tommy, but then in the movie, just like in the book, she finds herself questioning the motive behind it. Is it superficial? Is it just because I want to go to the prom that I'm doing this? Then because of that, she self-sacrifices. And yes, then she's out of the picture for a while. And then she comes back in during the Black Prom stuff.
I think that's just something that may just work better in a book. To me, it didn't, mind you, it didn't bother me. I noticed it. I was like, well, she disappeared. That's weird. And then it became more about the guy, which was okay. It was good.
I said this in our first video in regards to the De Palma version, and that's that Carrie's not the story of Carrie. It's the story of three different people: Carrie, Sue, and Chris. And Sue is kind of like the middle figure. Sue is our into this. Sue is us. We go with the flow, but hopefully one day we wake up and realize our mistakes. Chris is like us on in an extreme basis. That would be Chris Hargensen. She's the ultimate villain. She's there to just destroy things because they don't go her way. When Kerry, of course, would be the opposite end of that spectrum. So in that sense, these characters fill this role, and I think again, in terms of a comparison to the book, this one brought that out the most. I see your point in terms of her disappearing. It is odd, but in terms of the themes being portrayed there, I think maybe having something to compare it with can be distracting. I know because I was watching it, and the De Palma one is so stuck in my head that comparisons were imminent. But of course, I had reread the fucking novel, so that was also sticking out at the forefront. But I'm with you. Tommy was fantastically portrayed, a lot closer to what is in the book. In the original movie, you don't kind of get that feeling that he is actually a good guy. I mean, you do,
eventually,
but
yeah.
It's eventual, yeah. Whereas here, it's pretty obvious from the get-go that he is genuinely a good person and is portrayed that way, and that was a good thing. That was a good thing to see brought back. And now let's go to the opposite end of that spectrum. Chris Hargensen, the villain of the picture, the one that absolutely fucking hates Carrie for no good reason, really, and her boyfriend Billy. What did you think of these portrayals?
I honestly think this was the worst part of the movie. I think the bully sucked. Like, never at any point did I feel the like cringing pain that Carrie feels. You know, like the original movie, you're kind of like the whole time you're like, man, these people suck. And this one, you're like, man, these people are cartoons, to me at least. That being said, I think the problem was mostly with the chick. The guy, I kind of believed weirdly. Especially when you kind of see his character later on. He's like kind of an asshole. I just didn't like the girl. I thought she sucked in that bully role.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the weakest part for the movie for me. Everyone else I actually liked. Even the Sue thing, I liked that they replaced it with the guy. Like, all right, at least there was a replacement. And I do like that they, to kind of make us, well, at least for me, to kind of make up for the crappy villain, they focus more on Mom and Carrie, because the villains are kind of downplayed in this, at least compared to the original movie. I don't know how they are in the book. I don't know if it's how they are in the book, but yeah, like some of the stuff, like they're posting the thing on Twitter or on YouTube, and they're like cackling. And I was like, oh man, that's corny. Mind you, that is how people are, but it was like it was bordering on cringy. But I don't think it ever reached that. I don't think it was horrible. I just think that was the weakest point for me.
I'm on the opposite end of that spectrum. I actually thought all that stuff was good. And again, it goes hand in hand with the fact that it's mirroring what is going on in the book. And I actually thought the posting, I mean, it would be relevant to what, it would be the equivalent of what someone would do nowadays. And we've seen the aftermath of that and how it affects people's lives nowadays. So I thought that was a relevant comparison to an equivalent.
I think the posting would have been fine if they weren't going like as they're doing it. That was just too cartoony for me.
I don't remember that part, but
it was there. Trust me, because I noticed. I was like, man, these people are cartoons, but it was okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'll stick with what I said in terms of I thought that was well portrayed, and again, a good comparison to what was in the book. Again, beat for beat, almost exactly what happens in the book is brought to the screen there in that regard. Another thing that I don't know if you noticed this, but that is the teacher, Ms. Desjardins, is actually given a role in this versus in the original where she's just kind of a throwaway character at the beginning and then you see her kind of a little bit in the middle. She's actually given her, that would be the gym teacher, she's actually given a fuller role as she has in the book. And that makes her death actually at least a little bit more impacting versus just some random whatever.
No, she didn't die.
No, she died. Well, she does. She didn't die, but it makes her role and the eventual outcome at least a little bit more impacting because she did have something to do with it. And on top of that, they also brought in characters like Chris's father, who was a lawyer, who's trying to sue. I mean, not trying to sue, but trying to bully the school into letting go of what Chris has done to Kerry, and the principal, and all that stuff was reintegrated back into the story, which again was nice to see because it was excluded originally. And then at the ass end of the movie, we have the commission the Federal Commission report being done where they're asking Sue about the events, which is again something that is peppered throughout the book. So it was nice to see a nod to that at the end, and then showing the implications of what may come or what may be out there, actually laid out, which again is kind of how the book ends, the idea that there are others that, like Carrie. So all that was pretty cool to me. Probably nothing special to you, or maybe not even noticed, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, from that we go to the actual carry out of the Black Prom segment forward. This is where the movie went from being ultra loyal to the book to being more akin to what happened at the Black Prom in the Brian De Palma movie, and which again doesn't deviate too much from the book, but it does skim over certain things, and it changes the focus to a confrontation between Carrie and her mother, which remains intact here. So in that sense, from the Black Prom forward, or rather when things go wrong at the prom forward, it's pretty much more in tune with the original movie than it is with the book, although again deviations are at the minimal. So the fact that we're in a more modern time gives us a chance to do a lot more stuff and actually show the extent of Carrie's abilities, which was nice to see. I do wish they would have gone to one, and there was one like minor shot that suggested that maybe they would have gone there, and that was an overhead shot where they show Carrie walking down away from the school, and the fire hydrants are going off, and I was like, oh, they're actually going to do her rampage, because in the book she actually ends up killing over 400 people in the town.
That being said, Rampage is quite bigger in this.
Yes, it absolutely is. So they kind of make up for it in that, or I shouldn't say they make up for it, but they kind of do the equivalent with that. So what we do get is Rampage at the Black Prom that is a little bit more, effects heavy. What did you think about the Black Prom outcome in this one? And how did you compare it to the original, etc.?
I'll say that in this one, I guess to kind of reinforce a point you made, in this one it's a lot more clear that she is aware of what she's doing. Well, whereas in the original, she's just kind of in that pose, and it's kind of like a shock thing. So, and it can be thrown in as it was like a shock reaction that caused all the shit to happen. Because she's not like grabbing people and shit in the original movie.
Yeah.
Just shit's happening. Which I liked, But in this one, they kind of change it. Like, she's clearly aware. She's murdering fools. She's grabbing people and like throwing them and shit. Which, okay, yeah. I wouldn't say I like it better than the original's reasoning, but it does make sense for the character and how the way they kind of teased it, I guess.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I'm okay with it. I will say that stylistically, this ain't got shit on the original. But when it comes to spectacle, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the big difference between the two comes down to what Carrie is portrayed as. In the original, she's a victim through and through. In the book, she's a victim, but like I said, she's much more aware of her capabilities. In both, she is a girl on the brink of breaking. And she's just wanting that one moment of respite, of rest, of something normal happening. And in both, that moment is shattered and broken. But in the original, she remains the victim, a reactionary.
Yeah. And
her rampage is more done out of, the shock initially, and then just everything letting loose. In this one, it's her deciding, this is my breaking point, fine, here's what you wanted. So she's much more in control of that. And it's kind of a gutsy move to adapt that.
Yeah, it is.
Considering the times.
It could have gone really wrong. It could have made you go, screw this.
Exactly. Because it could take away any empathy you feel.
Yeah, it really could have. But I don't think it did.
Yeah.
I don't think it did. But I also, like I said, I also never felt her pain in this movie. So I think it was that disconnect for me that didn't do it. I was like, okay, cool, she's rampaging. That's cool. At least it's going to look cool. And there's like a payoff that's satisfying in that way. I think if they had played her more like the original, and then she had done this, it would have been like a weird tonally. You know what I mean? But I think that the changes they made actually ended up making up.
Yeah,
for that.
they linked together.
Yeah. Which is why I didn't hate it. That change, you know what I mean? Like her just murdering fools and shit and flying and shit.
Yeah. Now, to go along,
And it was neat to watch too.
To go along with something you've mentioned before, while you felt that Chris especially was on the verge of being cartoony, I always felt that her mom, though spectacular in the original, was a living cartoon, like a stereotype of what we'd expect out of an abusive, religious nut character. Don't get me wrong, it works. It absolutely fucking works. But on the other end of the spectrum, here I thought that they balanced the mom character all the more so that she comes off as somewhat sympathetic herself. You kind of want to give in a little something to her despite how awful she can be. So when Carrie's rampage eventually leads her to her mom's home, her confrontation with her mom becomes less of a resting point for Carrie's character and becomes more of a tragedy for this version of Carrie. So when she is bemoaning the fact that she killed her mother, it makes a lot more sense than when Carrie in the original one is bemoaning killing her mother, because that mother was fucking horrible, man. And you know,
Yeah,
here it's made overtly clear.
I'll say
that Carrie loves her mother despite everything.
I'll say that in the original, it's more, or in the original movie, it's more the story of Carrie, and you know what I mean. Like when her mom kills her, you're like, God damn it, chick can't catch a break. Whereas in this one, it's the story of both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it is more tragic in a way, but you know what I mean. Like the change of like that change of that dynamic is what made it different.
Yeah.
Feeling.
And now let's get to the an element you've touched on already in terms of the her rampage after the Black Prom, and that is, yes, some of the effects on this are pretty cool. It's cool to see Carrie use her full range of abilities. Some things are added in, some things are heightened, and I like pretty much all of that stuff. It looked pretty neat. But I think the shining moment was her vengeance against Chris and Billy, you know, her would-be torturers at school. That was really neat. I always, you know, kind of hoped for something a little bit more in the original. Again, I'm not tearing it down. I'm just saying it would be neater to see some. And here they give you a little bit more, you know. And they very dangerously toy with making Carrie switch over to unlikable in this sense, you know, because she is overtly taking them down. In the book, she doesn't overtly take them down. Again, they're just victims of circumstance. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. She's probably not very well aware that they were even involved in what happened to her. But here she's aware of it, and they've realigned the circumstances to where they come head to head, just like in the original Carrie adaptation. But that whole carry out with the car, you know, I just thought that was really cool looking, and so it's always cool to see somebody that you hate in the movie get their comeuppance, and so that was pretty cool for me. But anyway, anything that stood out for you or didn't on the opposite?
I think this was more of like a. I think this was more of like a. Let's try to like have cool shit on there, which there's nothing wrong with.
I mean, it's they die in the way they die in the original. Only
No,
you get to see
I mean
more.
that entire bit.
Yeah.
In the prom, which is fine because the original didn't have that. It was just like shit's happening, but it had that badass hook of everything. Takes a weird turn in terms of editing and then sound design, and it makes you feel really uncomfortable. This doesn't have that. Instead, it just has like indulging in gore, basically, which is okay. You know, at least it did something different. At least it didn't try to emulate the original thing, and because it wouldn't have made sense. You know what I mean, to do that. And they do kind of tease it. There's a little tease in there where the sound goes out, and you're like, oh no, they're gonna do it. Thankfully, they don't. They do their own thing, which is cool. I wouldn't say I prefer it. But it was cool that they did their own thing, and there was some cool effects in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Stylistically speaking, just in terms of lighting, camera work, and all that stuff. Yeah, like you said, it touches not a fucking
Yeah.
inch of the original.
But at least they didn't try to redo it.
But yeah, it does remain stylistically consistent with what it's doing. So there's that to
Yeah.
take into consideration, and it does have other goals in a sense. So yeah, like you said, it wouldn't make sense. So I get where you're coming from. That pretty much covers in terms of, action and effects go hand in hand in a type of movie like this. There's one more thing I want to touch on, and that is when Carrie kills her mother and basically comes to that realization that there is no rest for her. And damn it, I killed my mom on top of all that. And she brings down the White House on top of her. I thought that was pretty cool. It would have been really neat to have the scene where the stones make sense a lot more reintegrated into the movie. However, we saw that scene, that deleted scene, and it was not very well acted.
So some might say
that's unfortunate, but that scene would have been really neat to have in there in a flashback sense, as they did the original scene with Carrie's birth at the beginning. It would have been really neat to really tie it up completely. But again, considering they've just shown you Carrie go whole hog with her powers, you get the idea that she can do stuff like that and that she's self-destructing. So it's not like it's a complete, a confusing moment or anything. It just would have been really neat to see that. One more thing that I would have loved, considering how loyal it is to the events in the book, I would have loved to have seen the effects that her TK has on her body. By the end of the book, she is described as almost crone-like because it's sapping away at her so much. Cool. So that would have been pretty neat to see embodied, especially with the effects capabilities we have right now. But as it is, it did a surprising amount in terms of bringing the beats from the book to the screen. So there is that to consider. The score in this is actually pretty damn good. I mean, you have to... Obviously, they're at the prom, so you'll hear some modern-day song selections.
Oh, there is this weird, that reminded me, by the way. There is this weird montage sequence that came out of nowhere that I felt really weird about. Well, it reminded me because there was a song selection in there, and I was like, what the? Montage in the midst of drama with your mom. Weird.
Yeah, that was... I actually thought that was pretty cool because it bridged so much material in such a little brief time. Which is good because, again, if you want all that material in there, which I did, to be honest with you, to get something different, to see something more akin to the book, it was really neat to see all that material brought into the mix. I guess in terms of thinking, because again, we think Kerry, we think of the Prom movie, to think of a montage in there would be weird.
Yeah, especially because it didn't really add much. It was just people picking out suits.
Yeah,
which I get, it goes to with the prom thing.
Yeah,
but since it comes right after a dramatic scene, it was a little weird.
But anyway, the back to the score. What did you think of the score? I thought the score was fantastic. I mean, excluding again the soundtrack selections, which whatever.
I honestly don't remember it. I do remember the soundtrack selections were stunk, but you don't really judge a movie like this on the soundtrack selections. I don't remember the score very well, so I can't really add much to it.
I thought the score was exceptional. It was really good. It stood on its own, so there's that to say to it. Some really good pieces in there. Again, soundtrack selections that are in there make sense. They come at the spots that you would expect them to be in, i.e. the prom. Unfortunately, once the movie ends, it goes directly into a soundtrack selection that you're like, the fuck is this song, man?
It was really bad, yeah.
Fucking song sucked. Anyway, whatever. Visually and aesthetically speaking, this film, it doesn't have the stylistic impact that the original does. There is no kind of hazy, nightmarish quality to Carrie's life versus this bizarre wash of colors, impressionistic almost turn of events at the prom night. It looks cinematic, but it verges on looking almost TV cinematic.
I'm not saying agree.
I am not saying TV level.
No,
I'm saying TV, like a movie made for TV.
Yes, I actually
a quality movie made for TV, but still.
I agree with you on this, and I think that extends to the directing. If I'm going to be honest with you, there were several times where there is some odd cuts, or like continuity cuts, that I noticed, which I usually don't notice shit like that, and I don't care about that shit. But in this one, they were a little bit noticeable, and there was like some stuff that just didn't. It could have looked cool, and it was just kind of bland. That being said, I don't think it's horrible directing. I just think it's something that was kind of like, it wasn't very good. And that extends to that look of just kind of like a TV movie. And not a bad TV movie, mind you. It looks good. It's just nothing like spectacular.
Yeah. And I agree with you. The direction in this is capable. It's just not what you would consider like a fucking directorial auteur type of work.
Yeah. It was whatever. It was okay.
Which again, I think falls more into line with the fact that we've gotten a version from Brian De Palma that comes from someone whose visual language is so present that when you compare it, it kind of cheapens this one all the more because you're like, well, fuck, man. I mean, it's like comparing Hitchcock to Michael Bay. The fuck are you going to do there? You're not going to say one's greater than the other. You're never going to say Bay is greater than Hitchcock. Bay fucking licks.
It would have been neat if they had gotten someone who can pull off good visuals. That would have had at least two different, but still very like visually interesting movies. Instead, we got one that's very visually interesting and one that's not very visually interesting. But they both have their strengths and weaknesses. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It
would have been neat to have one that are both strong in that sense. Instead, we have something that's not strong in that sense, I think.
So let's. You already decided that this is not a hit, but let's give it a grade on a scale of 1 through 10. What would you give this, and any final thoughts?
This isn't a movie I hated. I will say that when we finished it, I was not impressed. But as time passed, I kind of was like, okay, you know, it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad movie. I will say it's not a hit for me, but only barely. It's not shit either. It's kind of in the middle. It's something you should watch and make up your mind. Because you're either going to like it, or you're going to think it's okay, or you're going to hate it. You know what I mean? Like, there is a middle ground. And I'm in that middle ground. But I do recommend that you see it to see where you stand. I'll give it a slightly above mediocre 6.5. It's not something that I hate, but it's not something I love. I will say that this is probably a little more watchable than the original, because the original, it does hurt to watch, because you're like, damn, dude. Whereas this one's more like fun.
Yeah. I thought that this definitely doesn't deserve all the backlash it got. That's one off right there. I don't think. And I was reading some of the criticisms, and it was clear to me, technical aspects aside, it was clear to me that a big amount of the people, the bulk of them, that were being critical of certain aspects hadn't read the book. Because all they were comparing it to was the De Palma movie. And I understand that. Again, I'll state, the De Palma movie is the adaptation of Carrie. It will remain so probably forever. And for a good reason. It's an excellent movie. And if you are to see one, it is the De Palma version. It's fantastic. That being said, if you have read the novel, I do recommend you see this. Because a lot of that stuff that you might have missed in the De Palma movie, or maybe forgot that you missed because the De Palma movie has supplanted the novel, in pop culture, will be reintegrated in. And it is interesting that they actually had the balls to toy with the idea of a premeditating Carrie, especially in these times. Had this movie come out now, imagine, fuck. The implications of basically a school shooter. This is what we have here, basically. Only she has TK powers. So that was interesting to see. And it was, as a reader, it was interesting to see these elements play out a lot more closely to the events. That being said, I think, like you, that a different director would have done this movie wonders.
Yeah.
Because it's clear to me that
it's on the edge of being really good.
Yes. It's clear to me that the screenwriter, and especially knowing the screenwriter from interviews, and he's gone on to write comic books, and of course he's written television and film before. Knowing what I know about this guy, he absolutely fucking loves the source material. So it would have been interesting to either see him or a more adept director take a hold of this script and do something with it, because it would have brought that whole new level of creativity to it that would have made it visually impacting.
Yeah.
And really brought out what was on the page to life. Because if there's one thing that is without a doubt true, is that the screenwriter wanted to praise the book and the movie, the De Palma classic that is, all in one point. And he does that. If you see the writing, you can see that. But then you have to contend with the fact that it has, a director.
The paint job ain't that great.
Yeah, exactly. That being said,
and I will say, let me just add to that. I will say that all the problems I had with this movie, mostly, are not story based. They are technical based and direction based, and visual based. You know what I mean? So that kind of supports your point that you're trying to make. That it is not the story that there's problems with. It's kind of the presentation.
Yes, and I agree. That being said, I think the sum of its parts is greater than, the downside. And a lot of that has to do, again, with the screenwriting in play here. The fact that it does loyally follow the beats of the book quite well as pays homage to the De Palma classic. I absolutely love that they brought the relationships to a clearer focus as far as Sue Snell, as far as Carrie and her mother. They shone a different light on that, which was excellent. And I love some of the actresses in this. Chloe Grace Moritz is one of the greatest youngest actresses, and Julianne Moore has always been a favorite of mine. So, I mean, that alone there is a winner for me. And yeah, man, certain other people, especially what's his face, Baby Driver.
Baby Driver guy.
He was a pretty cool Tommy Ross, man. So yeah, overall,
there's no Travolta in this.
The positives far outweigh the negatives for me in this. There are some moments that I wish weren't in there, i.e. the last shot in the movie.
Yeah.
Felt like a bit much.
Yeah.
But again, those moments are far few and in between versus what I saw as good. So that being said, my final score on a scale of 1 to 10 would be a 7. Do give this a view if you've read the book, for comparison's sake. But yeah, if you don't want to go through 3 different versions of Kerry, just stick with the original.
Really, our score should kind of show you how this movie kind of is. Like, I'm leaning towards not a hit, and I give it a 6.5. You are a hit, and you're a 7. There's not much difference there. It's just gonna depend on what you think.
Yeah, it really is. It's gonna continue to be a divisive movie, and a lot of it, and I think you'll agree with this, is the fact that the De Palma movie exists. That alone is gonna make any subsequent adaptation a divisive thing.
Yeah, especially when like we said, the directing is not very good.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's our thoughts on the 2013 version of Carrie. We've already covered the first one. Check that video out. We've covered the sequel to the first one. Sucks! Fucking terrible. Check that out. And soon enough, we'll cover the TV version of Carrie, starring Angela Bettis and produced by Brian Fuller, which, there you go. And that alone, if you know who those guys are, should get you a little excited if you haven't seen it. But we have, and we'll tell you what we think about it when that comes. In the meantime, this has been Ahab and the Goon Chick. This is Stephen King's Shit or Hit. I call it a hit. You call it some shit. What do you think? Hit like, share, subscribe, and those notification buttons, because we're out.
This music, stupid sounds, all kinds of shit for you. Anything goes inside the night for a couple of corpulent dudes. This music, stupid sounds, all kinds of shit for you.